Hello. Hey guys. Welcome everyone. Matt Turck from FirstMark Capital. As usual, thanks very much to Bloomberg, our venue host, for once again having us in this amazing room. So we have an amazing lineup tonight, and as you guys saw, so we have 4 exceptional data scientists, Hillary now at Excel, Blake from Foursquare, Gilad from BetaWorks, and Adam from Tumblr. So some of the very best, not only in New York, but across the nation. So those guys are going to be presenting each back-to-back, sort of the format we had the last few times. But I'm very excited to be starting this event with a chat with Joe Lonsdale, currently of Formation 8, but we're going to go into his background in a minute. So, Joe.
Thanks, Matt.
Your mic up, is working?
I think so. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Terrific to have you. So, you're an exceptionally accomplished guy, and I'd love to start the conversation maybe with your story quickly. So from Palantir to Adipar to now Formation 8, maybe the quick rundown, and then we'll go into more specific parts.
Should I give background on the companies for people? Is that
no? So we'll go into the companies in detail afterwards. So just your personal story, I guess.
Sure. Well, I grew up in California in Silicon Valley and was computer science at Stanford, and was there kind of during the bubble, so it was quite an interesting time, and ended up working at PayPal. And PayPal was a really cool place to be able to work while I was at school. You guys have probably heard of a lot of the people who were there, so I got to kind of be a junior member of that group and saw, I guess there's like 17 or so companies now that my colleagues have started that have done quite well out of PayPal. And the central challenge at PayPal, I mean, there were many, but the central challenge, which you might have heard, was that the Chinese and Russian mafia were stealing all of our money. And they're stealing all the money of about 8 competitors of ours. And most of these companies got destroyed because we couldn't stop them from doing that. And we tried all sorts of things. And we tried to use artificial intelligence, of course, to detect who the bad guys were. And that worked pretty well at first, but then the bad guys would adapt their tactics. And it turned out AI is like not nearly as good as the human mind at certain things. Maybe one day it will be, but right now AI is still very simplistic relative to how people can think. And so we ended up having to build systems that would complement our AI to help with investigators. So we had like 120 investigators using technology to see what was going on along with the AI. And that combination cut down the fraud by 90%. And we sold to eBay before Spitzer was able to destroy us for maybe being a bank or not, and got out. And so again, I was only really junior then, but that was a really framing experience because during that time we got to work a lot with the government and the intelligence groups who were trying to help us. And it turned out we ended up helping them a lot because they weren't really experts at using data, so they'd come to us for advice all the time about what should they be doing with their data. And around this time, 9/11 happened. And we realized, wow, we're doing all this really interesting investigative stuff, and the government doesn't seem to really know what they're doing. This is really worrisome. Moreover, they seem to be violating civil liberties with what they're telling us they're doing. And so this could be a really big problem. And so we were inspired after that experience to basically eventually found Palantir to help bring together a lot of the best guys we knew in Silicon Valley to really help the government on the intelligence side. So that was the really beginning of Palantir there. And I got to invest a lot with Peter Thiel and work at his funds for quite a while. But then while we kept talking about this idea, and eventually started Palantir in 2004. And I was there for about 6 years, hired a lot of the team, ran product, then ran business, and then replaced myself with smarter people and went on to my next company.
And then that was Adipar.
Sure. And so Palantir started on the government defense side. And I don't know how much I should go into. I think you're going to be asking me about it in more detail. But about a few years in, I started the finance side of Palantir, which became the commercial side, which is about half of Palantir's business now. And got to learn a lot about different things in global finance. I decided there was a big gap in one part of global finance where the wealth, the money itself was not represented very well in data. So there's about $20 billion a year spent on private wealth management technology by about 9 different types of organizations: RIAs, banks, sovereign wealth funds, endowments. And we realized that if we could actually build that part correctly, then the rest of finance could become a lot more data-driven in really good ways. And on top of that, there was just a huge need in that area itself. So we started Adipar as a private wealth management technology company and as infrastructure for global finance. So that started about 4 years ago. That's about 100 people in Mountain View, growing very fast, doing really well. So that was my second company. Again, my old right hand from Palantir became the CEO. I have some really talented people in there, so I became a chairman. And been doing a lot of investing ever since I the Palantir got going, I'd done well with Peter on a few things. I got to be more of an investor. And my best friend from Stanford, he had a pretty good fund, and his family built LG in Korea, so we were investing together and helping companies. And after Adipar really started to take off and I'd replaced myself, he convinced me to start a new fund full-time. And so about 2 years ago, we put together a $450 million venture capital fund, and that's my full-time job now. It's Formation 8. So that's what we're focused on.
I want friends like that start LG. And so 450, so is that the largest first-time VC fund?
It's actually smaller than some funds started in 1999, which is probably a bad year to compare yourself to. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, awesome. So let's talk about Palantir. So Palantir was a very secretive company for a number of years. Actually, a little bit like this place, Bloomberg was for a number of years as well. But it's opened itself up.
It's funny. It wasn't purposely secretive. No one really cared what we were doing, and they thought we were quite strange because everyone else was doing Web 2.0, and then it was like, what are these guys doing? So we didn't mean to be secretive. It just.
I mean, you can't friend people on Palantir.
We put like everything we were doing online and all these videos and try to get people to watch it, and no one really watched. They're pretty good videos, you know. Now that we're doing really, really, really well, then everyone starts to learn and talk about it, and I think that's why it seems a lot less secretive now.
So what does it do exactly?
Sure. So, gosh,
in some detail.
Sure. So Palantir is about, I guess, 1,500 people and 18 offices around the world. It's like half in global defense with about 18 countries, I guess, where it's working in defense and intelligence, and it's working about half in finance and other commercial areas now. The best way, Palantir is really hard to describe. The best way to understand it is we're trying to productize a huge area of what used to be IT services. So you'd go in, originally looking at the intelligence and defense world, and we looked at about 100 different contracts that were anywhere from a couple $100 million contract to a few $1 billion contract. Like Unisys gets paid $3 billion to put all of the Department of Homeland Security data together. And that takes them 2,000 engineers. It always takes them a few years to do. And we said, why are these contracts, why are they so expensive? Why do they take so many years? Why are they all done separately? Like, is there a way to create a single product that would replace the need for all these separate information platforms? And so the idea was we want to help people consume data. The core idea from PayPal is you can't just have computers automatically solve problems. The computer has to be helping the investigator solve the problem, has to be helping the investigators work together, right? Or analysts work together. And so we looked at this and we defined 4 different areas, 4 pillars of functionality. Data integration being probably the hardest one, search, discovery, and analysis, knowledge management, and collaboration. And the idea was to build a platform that out of the box would do all or most of what these IT services contracts needed to do, and then also serve as a platform to plug other things in and to work with the ecosystem. And so it took about 4 or 5 years to get to that point where we're that far along, but there's now been multiple times where there's literally $1 billion contract that people were working on, and we just came in and plugged in Palantir and replaced the need for that instead. So that was really the goal of the company.
And stop me when it'd be awesome to hear some details about that. Obviously, whatever you can talk about. But let's take the data integration piece, for example, which is like the holy grail that everybody's been trying to solve for such a long time. What's the approach there?
Sure, and I don't know if there's any one secret. I think I probably attribute a lot of my success to the fact that I have a lot of smart friends from Stanford and MIT who were able to convince to work on this. So I think right now there's an interesting thing in the culture where everyone wants to do their own company. It actually makes it really hard. I think there were 5 of us, my roommate from Stanford, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and Nathan from PayPal, who founded Palantir together. So first of all, there's already a lot of us. But then the next 20 people, I think any of them these days would have gone to Y Combinator maybe instead, given the culture. But we were able to convince them all to instead come together. So I think the real secret to Palantir's success was we just got a lot of awesome people. We gave them all a lot of upside, and we all worked together on it. In terms of the actual technology problems for productizing data integration, we kind of built it out in an information theoretical way. So we have what we call dynamic ontology, where any instance of Palantir works with its own ontology of the world, its own schema of the world. So if you're in a certain part of defense analysis, there's going to be 50 different types of missiles, and that really matters. Whereas if you're in another area, there's only going to be 1 or 2 types of missiles. But basically, what you have is in any of these contexts, you have hundreds of databases. I mean, the government, for example, spends I think $45 billion a year now gathering data for intelligence and defense purposes. So there's just almost infinite data. A huge amount of it is structured. And in the structured cases, they all have their own ontologies. So you have to create intelligent ways of mapping between those ontologies so they can talk to each other and go in one place. And you have to create the ability to preserve ambiguity because they're never sure about how it works. And so you end up having this giant link graph of the world. And it turns out the entity resolution problem and the search and discovery problem are really analogous, I guess. I don't know to go into too many details, but I think it's really interesting that like the way your brain works is it works through juxtaposition and it works through deduction. And the ways of defining juxtaposition and deduction are like pretty complicated. There's basically infinite ways. So if you can think of like if it's an object property model and you think of any two ways of linking properties, there's infinite ways of doing that, right? You can have the fact that we're talking to each other in this room and we're all in this room at the same time is one link that could exist between us. The fact that we grew up in the same city, but there's infinite links between entities. And so you have this like really interesting way of kind of predefining using different types of things, how things are linked together, and then using that both to do the entity resolution and then to allow the search and discovery to work well. And
does the ontology keep learning? I mean, how is it updated?
Yes. So the ontology. So the idea is even though we're against using artificial intelligence to figure out like fundamental truths about the world, you constantly want to use machine learning to figure out to keep learning about ways to update the ontology, and then to suggest it to the analyst, suggest to the administrator, here's a new way the ontology should work. Here's how we're going to set it up. And then the really interesting problem becomes, let's say. I'm not giving away any silly secrets here. Let's say like the CIA is using it and MI6 is using it. Like, who knows if they are? But let's say they want to talk to each other during a crisis. But of course, their ontologies are very different, and so they're calling them different things. So now, how do you enable that? And how do you deal with the collaboration rules for who's allowed to share what, depending what database it came from? And it gets really messy because you might have 100 databases and maybe 62 of them within, say, group A you're able to ingest right now, but maybe a lot of those databases you can't ever ingest. They're going to exist independently, so you have to have something sitting next to it, talking to it, and updating it. And so you have this like really complicated setup over here, really complicated setup over here. Then you have all these rules about depending on the level of crisis and what the leaders are saying, you can share or not share certain things. And how do you do that intuitively in real time with your hundreds of thousands of analysts, many of whom might only have high school degrees? So it has to be very intuitive to them. These aren't data scientists using a product. These are people who are just, they might be agents out in the field or people supporting them. So you get a lot of really cool problems that come out of that.
And the fact that the product is targeting analysts, is that a requirement from the customer, or is that a philosophy of yours that you should be delivering a complete solution? Well,
those are the people that do the work, and I think really there's probably a lot of areas, but there's two areas in the world, which are the two areas we started in, where there's like massive amounts of heterogeneous data, and there's literally millions of people doing some kind of analysis, and that's defense and finance, right? So in both those areas, you have a similar setup. You have each giant object property model of the world, and people trying to analyze and collaborate, and different rules about who can see what. So that's why those two areas kind of made sense to start in together.
In a few years in, where do you land in the balance between services and technology? I mean, are those problems solvable via technology brute force?
That's the fundamental question of the business model for Palantir. Is your goal is always to productize something. And to be clear, I'm an advisor, I guess, but I haven't been there for 4 years now. So I'm just more like a friend of the company and a shareholder at this point. But their current strategy is always to identify new areas where you can productize. But before you productize the first time, you're going to have a services component while you're figuring it out and hooking it up and stuff. And then you learn it really well. And then you make the product something where if you do it next time, every time it's easier. It eventually gets to the point where you just productize. So the early areas Palantir works in, you can just install it, hook it up, it works right away. Whereas all the new areas on the outside is always going to be some services component while they're learning it. And that's how you think of it.
And from a business standpoint, so in the room there's a bunch of entrepreneurs who are starting companies or running companies, a lot of which, or a number of which, target Wall Street. So you're selling to great industries, but which are known to be particularly hard to start a relationship with. Any lessons learned there in terms of how you get a big government contract or how you start working with those banks?
It took quite a long time to get them to take us seriously. It was a really good thing that we had, first of all, older people. I don't think my roommate and I's 21, 22-year-olds had a product that they would have actually trusted us with any of these big things. You had to have older people who were involved, who were able to bring in. And we had some mentors, guys like George Tenet, who, thanks to our CEO, were able to convince him to be inspired by us and to help us out. And then he was really smart about how to get in and get access and how to come across the right way and whatnot. So we had quite a few mentors in both finance and defense that were really critical. I think with a consumer company, it's really easy for really young people to build something that takes off and takes over the world virally. I don't think that's. I think you do have to include like older people probably for these institutional sales and who actually have a big role in the company. Otherwise, they don't take you seriously. And there's probably a lot of lessons too about how you interact with them in a way where you come across correctly. I think I think also it's like you can never really get the giant contract at first. Whenever you're starting these companies, you like get really excited because there's like this like big contract you're going after. And in my experience, that never happens. It's always like a little pilot, then a little bit bigger pilot, then a little bit bigger one. And it's just, I've seen it too many times where you get excited and think you're going to have these giant deals, and it's just, at least in my experience, we're never able to pull that off. It was always things that grew over time, and every year you'd get to slightly bigger contracts, prove yourself, make them work, and then kind of earn something at the next level.
And the typical problem when you try to sell analytics is that it's sort of the ROI, right? It's like, how do you demonstrate success? So you do a pilot with 60 people, but how do you get them from doing the 60-person pilot to something much larger? How do you convince them to spend money?
Yeah, I think the business relationships are really key. I think there's a lot of really talented people who work on the technology side in these big companies, but the incentives and the culture is not set up to work well with bringing in outside technologies and bringing in new technologies whatsoever. You need somehow to have like a really pressing business need. I guess that's another thing I'd say is it has to be something that they desperately need, and it has to be an order of magnitude better if you're a small company. You can't just come in and have a slightly better solution than IBM and then somehow win an RFP. It never works. So you have to be like massively, massively better to the point where it's literally like I was saying, like something's going to cost $1 billion and you're going to charge them a few million, and it's going to get a better result. And if it's that big, because they're not predisposed to work with these crazy kids who are coming and who they'd never heard of before. Like they'd much rather work with the people they're working with. And so you have to have like the top business guy's buy-in, who he knows is critical for his business. He's desperate for something. Something's not working that you're fixing, and then it has to be much, much better than the alternative. And then even with the big banks, like we'd start with these really small contracts, doing something that was pretty important to them. And then once we succeeded, we'd see another bigger thing they were in. So for example, I guess I shouldn't give names of banks, but there'd be like one bank that had bought other banks, and they needed systems to talk to each other. And it turned out this was like a very isomorphic problem to something we'd done multiple times in the government context. And so we were able to get in, prove it, and do that well. While we were doing that, we realized they were in the process of spending like $500 million on their mortgage-backed security technology, because there's over 1,000 different data sources they needed to integrate and then like build on top of to leverage for how they make choices about what to do with their multi-trillion-dollar mortgage-backed security portfolios. And that turned out to also be an analogous problem, something Palantir could do very well. And because
you said, hey, we'll take that.
And it was hard. I mean, in one of these cases, we said, hey, we'll take that. The people running it were very threatened. I mean, there's been cases they'll give you fake data and try to make you lose. It's like a really, in general, I'm friendly with the people running the technology in these places, but some of them get very threatened and try to mess you up. But yeah, we eventually were able to get past that and charge $100 million for something that would have cost $500 million. But that was like multiple years into it before you can get contracts that size.
Okay, great. At Ipar, what kind of data problems have you been solving there?
So at Ipar is a lot more deeper, esoteric data problem. There's about 6,000 custodians in the world. A custodian is like a Schwab or a Fidelity or Bank of New York. And they each have their own 1,000 or so transaction codes, plus a lot of little extra things. And basically, to get all that data to talk to each other, it was similar to Palantir's problem, but it's a very specific, esoteric thing, because you have things like partnership accounting and tax lots and multi-currency and all this other stuff. And so to be able to actually go into like a $10 billion RIA and run and solve the technology problem, I thought this was going to be actually relatively easy after the Palantir stuff. It turns out it took us about 3 years with a team of 30 or 40 really talented product engineer people to get like the basic systems to work at these places. And then it just again, there's so many hard data problems in the world, and there's so much mess out there. I was shocked to discover a lot of the custodians were giving us bad data. Custodians, we've all heard of their names, and like their systems are that broken that they're the world of data is just so messy still in big corporations. It's just really shocking.
Now, how did you go about building the right DNA for IDPAR? I mean, if you're going to be like a heavy-duty analytics and data integration company, what's your ideal team?
So,
and where do you find them?
Yeah, sure. So there was this intern who was probably the best intern we ever had at Palantir, and he didn't want to drop out of school to join Palantir, so they'd let me convince him to drop out of school to be my co-founder at Adipar. And then we had a lot of different kind of data scientists type engineers that we brought in from different top schools and from different companies. I'm not poaching from Palantir yet. I always told Palantir if they stop growing really quickly, I'm going to take their best guys, but I can't do that yet.
So you're finding that? So is there a correlation between top schools and how great the people are, or how do you
Yeah, I think there's like 20 top tech schools where like 80% of the talent comes from, and so I think we spend a lot of time at those. Maybe I'd probably speak at 10 of those a year and try to meet the students and try to keep track of that. And then of course there's just various friends in the Valley. I think it's a lot easier. There's things that are easier and things that are harder about your second company. I think it's really important that your co-founder and your early executives will tell you when you're being an idiot. I think that's why I've seen a lot of these things fail. So that was one thing maybe they tell me too often, but it's probably better than the other way around. So yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So let's talk about Formation 8 a little bit, and I guess the type of opportunities you see there. So I think part of your investment thesis, so I guess the value proposition is a connection with Asia, among other things. But in terms of focus, you seem to be talking a lot about people doing interesting things in complicated areas like finance and healthcare. And
yeah, so I tend to think there's been about 5 waves of technology companies. This is really oversimplifying over the last 100 years. And if you go to like obviously consumer was the recent wave where most of the money was made. Before that was like the telecom. Before that, everyone was working on enterprise software. So like when Palantir went into one of the banks, we actually replaced one system from 1979. That's very common. Like hospitals, governments, energy companies, logistics companies. Like everyone's running 30-year-old enterprise software because that's when it was first built. And I think that with all the data now available, there's this really interesting opportunity to finally go back and fix and replace that infrastructure because it's actually no longer sufficient. Like the old infrastructure was great at helping us solve linear problems, basic like reporting and data warehousing and stuff. It's not good at helping knowledge workers solve nonlinear problems. And I think there's a lot of really cool companies being built to kind of empower people to solve nonlinear problems in these spaces. The other theme I would mention, which is really important, is if you look at what worked in the consumer wave and where most of the money was made, most of these companies had really powerful network effects and platform effects, right? That's why a lot of these became dominant and took over. And I think the same thing actually applies to what I'm calling this wave of smart enterprise companies. I didn't mention this with Palantir or Adapar, but a lot of, I'd say, the long-term value of places like Palantir is the fact that, let's say you're helping, like, you're doing cyber analysis and you're helping a bank do all of its cyber stuff with our platform, and then another bank's doing it, another bank's doing it. Now suddenly you're helping the banks work together to do that, and then a 4th bank wants to come on, and the 5th bank wants to come on. Suddenly you have a network effect that's really, really valuable and really hard to break. It's the same thing. If you have 18 governments not only having this installed, but using it to collaborate in real time on their work, then it's like that becomes a really valuable network effect.
So it's a network effect in terms of knowledge within your organization, or in terms of sharing data?
It's also between organizations too, right? It's the fact that they're actually they're sharing data. It's like there's a history of how so you keep track of how they're doing the analysis, and then how you're sharing it with each other. There's like methods and policies they put in place where this is the only way they could do certain things. And then because you have this network effect and you spread, you get to be dominant, and then everyone wants to build on your platform. So you open up the platform. I think there's over 1,000 partners now actually building on top of Palantir. So being able to have a network and then being able to be a platform, I think is absolutely critical to be the really, really big companies. And I think that's definitely along the lines of what Adapar is doing, and a lot of our investments we're making right now. It's not just about solving these hard problems in big industries. It's about building it in a way where you do create these networks and platforms. Because I think that those are going to be the biggest companies that are coming up.
Okay, fascinating. Last question from me, and then I'll open it up to you guys. What are some of the companies, specifically the data-related companies, and use this generically, whether that's infrastructure, analytics, application, but what are some of the data-centric companies that you think are very interesting these days, either in your portfolio, companies you wish you had invested in, had Formation 8 being created earlier?
Well, there's a huge number out there. The data companies I tend to be most excited about are the ones that are focused on like replacing a specific workflow. So it's like there's something that people are already doing in industry and are already budgeted towards, or that they're already working on, and this company uses their access to data to bring it together to make that workflow better, or make workflow work better. So I mean, like Relate IQ is a great example, is one we're involved in, where they're gathering all the data from all of your communication in your organization, your emails, your phone calls, all other types of stuff, and then they're like creating new and better workflows for collaboration and for follow-up, and using data science to help you do that better. And so just any of these companies that take data that's out there, it's part of your work, and then like enable you to take actions based on that. I think it's very interesting right now.
Great. Yeah, we had DJ Patel speak at an earlier event, so I guess you guys stole him from Greycroft. Great. All right. So let me open it up to questions. I think do we have a mic in the back? If there are questions.
It's like in Korea, they're really afraid to ask questions. Usually in America, you get more, though.
Yeah. Well, that's one.
They all take pictures of you in Korea, though.
Could you start, sir, with just your name and company, please?
David Elkins and iCapital Network. When you guys are working with governments, how did you deal with the data sovereignty laws and issues of them being able to share across your network and platform?
So yeah, no, the government stuff is really, really messy. First of all, Palantir in 2005 had to create the concept of an internal cloud because basically that's the only way to make it work for governments because they're not willing to use the external clouds. I think that's going to change eventually. Now I wouldn't build companies that way anymore. But so basically you had internal clouds there, and each one of these organizations has their own rules. And so a big part of what Palantir was doing, I say there's 4 pillars, the 4th one being collaboration. A lot of that was around being very specific to every piece of data. All the object properties had all this metadata around where they came from, who could access them, all that type of stuff. And then being able to track that ended up taking up a lot of the processing power and a lot of the work you did at Palantir, just tracking it all and exposing it really clearly to policymakers, having really clear audit trails, and just all that kind of stuff you have to do to work in these environments.
Another one? Okay, I'll ask the last question then. And sort of very generically, but what do you see in Asia in terms of innovation around data? Anything specific or different, or?
Well, I think there's not as many really hard data problems being solved yet. If you're going to go outside of the U.S., I think probably Tel Aviv and Seoul are the 2 strongest innovative areas, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And so you are seeing some new things there, but I think most of the places outside of Silicon Valley are still more focused on the consumer wave than anything else. And right now in Asia, the big thing that's happening, the secular trend, is the creation of this giant middle class. And so I think you're seeing some really clever mobile innovation in China and in Southeast Asia, and really clever ways of targeting these consumers, because that's definitely a big thing right now. You don't get as many people buying as much software there yet, and I think it's really hard to do the smart enterprise stuff there. So I think we're just starting to see them become consumers of a lot of the data workflow companies, and that's a new thing. And I don't think you're seeing as much really hard data innovation though yet over there.
Okay. All right, one quick one. Hold on. We need to give you a mic so that you can be heard and recorded and analyzed. And publicly shamed on social media.
So for Palantir as a company and for any company as such, I saw earlier when you guys started up and when you guys were going into DC, a lot of marketing effort was put in place. You had a lot of fancy parties around, a lot of ads around. How much of that really affected? How did marketing affect your bottom line, and how did marketing affect your sales?
And why was I not invited to the fancy parties?
Well, I hear they have parties downtown here. You haven't been to this yet?
Still waiting.
Yeah, there's about 100
people. What I've heard is Palantir, being a $1 million company, marketed and throw down parties as it was a $1 billion company.
So I
how
think
much
that
of that was affected?
I actually think that for the first 5 years, we did almost none of that. And I think that once we had some really big wins in DC where we'd very clearly done something substantive, I think marketing without substance is really dangerous. I think once we had wins we could point to where here are ways we've saved the government billions of dollars, here are ways we've done this good thing for civil liberties, we've helped people in the field. Once we did that, the question was how do you make noise and attract people to it? And I think probably one of the best ROIs was like renting out all of the subway ads around the Pentagon or something. That's what you might be referring to, which actually wasn't that expensive, but there's a lot of things like that they did, and there were a few events. But I think overall, the company spends the vast majority of its money on employees and offices, and maybe on food too. But I hear they're number 2 for food in the Valley, and I think it's ridiculous that people compete on this. But I think in general, you can't win without the substance. And as much noise as you want to make, you're not going to succeed and be a long-term valuable company. These companies are valuable because of what they achieve over 10, 15, 20 years. And that definitely requires the best engineers solving hard problems.
All right, awesome. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have because we have some amazing presenters right after this. So thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.